Hey, everybody. I've got a little bit of time and thought I would come see how everybody's doing. So I'm going to shoot this link out on a couple of social media channels and then we'll be ready to go. I'll say Thursday. Hope everybody's been having a great Thursday. I've got my Hebrew class tonight at 7. We're going to be doing going through some translation exercises based on Genesis 41. So looking forward to that. All right. Hello, Baron. Sorry, it's not a name I'm familiar with. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Hi, Moonshoes, Hand of Omega, Surdram Hassan. Hi, Joey. Hope you're doing all right. Hi, Kevin and Daniel, the brass geologist, Amanda. All right. Let's see. Just shooting this link out on a few more places. Rough day in class. Sorry to hear that. I know how that goes. Aramgard, thank you for the question. Is Elohim ever used in the singular in other Northwest Semitic languages, or is that a Hebrew exclusive innovation? So the exact word Elohim, Aleph Lamed, with or without a Vav, Hey Yod Mem, that would be Hebrew. But there are related languages like Phoenician and other languages where the plural version of their basic noun El can be used with that singular sense. It's not as common though. So there's a wonderful book by a scholar named Joel Burnett called A Reassessment of Biblical Elohim that talks all about that. And he develops, I think, the most robust theory for accounting for why Hebrew can use the grammatically plural Elohim to refer to single deities. And he describes that as the concretized abstract plural, which is the theory that I think makes the most sense. So if you're looking for a more detailed discussion about how that works, including in other related Semitic languages, I'd highly recommend checking out that book. How's your Dan McClellan version of the Bible coming along? I haven't touched it in a while. I've been working on this book so much that I have not had an opportunity to work on that. But I'm almost done with Genesis. So when I do have time to sit down and work on it, I hope to get through Genesis, and then I'm probably going to beef up the commentary, the notes. And then I might see about publishing the individual books fascically at first. So maybe just doing a volume on Genesis with the notes and then kind of doing something similar to what Robert Alter did. But not sure yet. We'll see. What evidence do we have for Paul? We don't have any direct archaeological evidence. We have the letters of Paul. And we don't really have a good reason to doubt that someone named Paul existed. We have reason to doubt certain things that are claimed about Paul, but the reconstruction of the history that makes the most sense of the available data, according to the majority of scholars, is that there was an individual named Paul who established these churches, who wrote these letters, who was a very influential missionary for Christianity in the earliest years, starting in the same decade as probably the execution of Jesus. Kevin, thank you so much for the question. What are some of the best graduate programs in the U.S. to become a scholar of theology and the Bible? I don't know a ton about theology programs. I would think that some of the divinity schools or the seminaries associated with larger universities like Princeton Theological Seminary, Harvard Divinity School, Chicago, I think, has a divinity school that's, I'm sure, excellent. Johns Hopkins is wonderful for, I think, what they probably still call ancient Near Eastern studies. UT Austin has wonderful programs, a bunch of big schools in California. So it's going to be most of your bigger programs these days, just because biblical studies and particularly theology are not going to be incredibly popular, particularly in state schools. As the corporatization of the American university rolls on, those things are going to atrophy. And so it's going to be either your gigantic programs or your schools specially focused on that kind of thing, like seminaries. But I wouldn't. An awful lot of seminaries and Bible colleges are not going to be very robust in terms of the data. They're going to be more about training pastors and doing missional stuff and things like that. So I wouldn't recommend a lot of the smaller ones in the Bible colleges and things like that. Makoto asked, do you go on the academic biblical subreddit? I've been on there from time to time, but I don't go. It's pretty rare. I go on there and if somebody tags me in something, or if someone links me to something and says, hey, what do you think about this? Anthony says, hi, Dan, excited for your book here in LA. Book signing plans. So that's Jan book, The Bible Says So, What We Get Right and Wrong About Scripture's Most Controversial Issues. I just had a meeting with the publisher today. We're putting together a promotional plan. I'm hoping to do some bookstore events and book signings and things like that. We haven't gotten to the point where we're actually laying stuff down, though. But if it does happen, it will be April, May of 2025, and I've told them I'm willing and eager to get out to some of the bigger markets where I know that there are folks who've reached out to me and said, please come here, and even some of the smaller markets. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that, but we don't have any plans in place yet. And thank you so much to everybody who's saying they've pre-ordered the book. That is wonderful news to me, and I know the publisher was very happy with the results of the first week of pre-order. So thank you very much. That's going to make it a lot easier for me to get the publisher paying more attention to me, so that I can get out to more places and do more publicity stuff. And also it's going to make it easier to get another book in the pipeline right away. And I've already got some ideas for a second book, including potentially like a volume 2, because I've got dozens more questions that I think could be answered, including 3 or 4 that I really, really wanted to include in this first book, but didn't have the space for. Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much. Does any Jewish Talmud mention Kabbalah and Zohar? That's a question for a Talmudist. I don't know if texts in the Talmud specifically reference Kabbalah and the Zohar. I gotta think some of the later stuff is going to mention it, but I've got to be honest, I don't know for sure. But let me poke at something real quick. Because Kabbalah, I think I'm not an expert in Kabbalah, but I think is more Middle Ages, and I think the Talmud is before that. But I imagine that there are ideas, certain mystical streams of tradition that are referenced that might have influenced later Kabbalah. But no, I'm not pulling up anything that directly answers that question. So if I recall, I think there might be a timeline issue there, but certainly mystical Judaism is going to be referenced in one way, shape, or form in the Talmud. How long does it take you to read the Bible? It depends on how much you're reading each day. If you read 30 minutes to an hour every single day, it's only going to take a few months to get through it. But if you're reading 10 minutes a couple times a week, it's going to take an awful long time. Deg and Brent, thank you for the question. Hey, Dan, you catch a lot of unfair criticism online. What's the best criticism you've received over the years, either in an academic setting or otherwise? When I defended my dissertation, I got an awful lot of fair academic criticism. And every time I submit something for publication, I usually get fair academic criticism. But I would say right now, someone pointed something out to me that, and it was not malicious, but it was certainly true that there are an awful lot of issues where I have not read as widely in other languages like German and French, where I am biased towards the English language scholarship. So that's something that I need to, that's definitely something that I need to work on. But I've usually, in my reading, have been convinced that there aren't significant departures from what is representative of the English language scholarship in the German and the French. And so that has made me not want to go take the time to research the non-English bibliography, but that is definitely a shortcoming in some of the stuff that's not that I've published, but in some of the social media content that I've produced. So I still have kind of a Eurocentric bias in that regard. Does the Bible say need H2O baptism to get Holy Spirit? That seems to be what is underlying some of the references to baptism in the New Testament, but at the same time, you also have the idea that that the Spirit came upon a bunch of people who had not been baptized, and people will say, "Yeah, but then the apostles told them they had to get baptized right away." So I think, as with so many things in the Bible, there are conflicting perspectives, and anyone trying to appeal to the Bible for a single prescription is probably got a lot of negotiating ahead of them to do in order to make that work. But thank you for the question. Thank you, Philip Talib Williams, for the super chat, the super sticker, whatever that's called. I'm not sure. Olive Blake, thank you so much. Hey, Dr. Dan, why was the Spirit hovering over the waters? Any parallels in other A&E myths? Also, update on the scholarly survey. Update on the scholarly survey is I'm going to be meeting with some folks a month from about now at the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature. I'm going to have a hard copy of all the questions with me to hand over to them, and hopefully that will be enough to get their buy off, and then it's just a matter of submitting stuff to the bodies that evaluate human related research and approve it. So hopefully early next year we'll have everything ready to go. There was a slight delay though this year. Any Spirit hovering over the waters? Yeah, so the word there, merachafet, is interesting. It is a participle that refers to the action of a hen incubating chicks, just kind of hovering over. And so the idea there seems to be that the Spirit can be thought of as kind of a hen over this, incubating these waters of creation from which all this life is going to spring. In terms of other parallels, I can't think of any off the top of my head. The usual suspects I don't think have parallels to that idea, but I think the idea there is that the Spirit is kind of the active agent of God that is overseeing, curating that the process. But thank you for a great question. Philip, I have a question. How would you explain John 19:7 to a Muslim? I don't know that my explanation would be any different if I were speaking to a Muslim. I don't know how Muslims approach the idea. What do we have? The Jews answered, "We have a law, and according to that law, he had to die because he claimed to be the Son of God." I was stomped, or hopefully you mean stumped, by a Muslim who told me that the Jews have a law against blasphemy, therefore the Jews' actions were not wrong. Well, it depends on, there are a couple of different things there. One is that John is not an incredibly charitable representation of Judaism. In fact, is frequently accused of Judeophobia, if not outright anti-Semitism. And so I don't think we should take seriously the representation of Jesus's accusers and challengers in John, nor should we take seriously Jesus's accusation that they all have Satan as their father. So yeah, first thing I would say is that this is a very rhetorical representation of Jewish folks, and so I wouldn't take that seriously. But at the same time, John is representing them as misunderstanding and falsely accusing Jesus. So if Jesus were the Son of God, then that would not constitute blasphemy for him to so identify. But then, in John 10, Jesus says, hey, your scriptures call humans gods, so why are you giving me a hard time? So, yeah, I don't know why the situation would be very different for Muslims, but I don't know enough about how a Muslim would approach that. Javi, thank you so much for the pronunciation guide. Hello, Dan. Hello, Javi. Do you know of any scholarly resources for discussion about Allah's omnipotence? Thank you. Allah's omnipotence, I don't really focus on the Quran or Islam, so I'm trying to think if I have anything on that. I really don't think I do. What do we have here? It's a book or a paper? No, that's a magazine article. Give me just 1 second to check a source to see if there's anything that might, because I can't really, I don't really know enough about the publications in that field to know if something is considered reputable or not. But it looks like if you go into Google Scholar, there are plenty of. Okay, so here's a Taylor and Francis publication. So that's certainly something that will be reputable. Looks like there's a book entitled "The Attributes of God in Islamic Thought" that was published this year, and there's a chapter, "The Omnipotence al-Qudra and the Will of God al-Irada in the Theology of Saif ad-Din al-Amidi." So that seems pretty narrowly focused, but that book might be a more academic approach than some of the more confessional stuff you might find in other corners. But yeah, I'm certainly not a specialist on that. Yeah, I think that's probably the most up-to-date, most scholarly publication that I would be able to come up with anytime soon. Jason Atreides of House Atreides, why do all the angel names have L rather than YAH in their names? It's probably because this is in the Hellenistic period, which is when you start to get this proliferation of angelic hierarchies and positions and responsibilities and narratives and names. The idea is to genericize things more. And so you have references to God as Hypsistos in Greek, the Most High. And that's a title that's actually known from Greek religion. And so what this does, because they're more cosmopolitan and they're interacting with a lot of different societies, if they genericize their deity more, that deity can subsume the deities of other nations. And they can say, oh, this is just your guy also. So there you go. It doesn't have this specific name, but we just know them by God. And so that is a rhetorical tactic. And so you see a lot more generic references to deity in the Hellenistic period and into the New Testament. And so I think that's probably that, combined with the fact that you have an awful lot of L names in the earliest period of Israel's history. So there's also kind of an antiquarian flavor to it as well. In fact, up to around the 10th century BCE, the theophoric elements in the names that come from Israel are exclusively, well, not exclusively, but there are no Yahwistic theophoric elements. The overwhelming majority of them are L theophoric elements. And then it's not until Adonai arrives on the scene, probably around 1000 to 900 BCE, that suddenly you start to see Yahwistic theophoric elements, and the L names drop off, and the Yahwistic theophoric names increase and predominate throughout the entire Hebrew Bible. So there's an antiquarian sense to it, and there's also probably a rhetorical value to having L names. Will there be a signed copy version of your book? I actually asked about that because I've been getting a lot of requests for that when I had my meeting with the publishers or the publisher earlier today, and they said that yeah, we'll be doing stuff with different groups. I'll probably be going to up to a bookseller here in Salt Lake called if they got to have a meeting with this bookseller, so maybe I shouldn't mention who it is. But anyway, the idea is I'd go into a room with stacks of books and sign a bunch of them, and then also sign, I think they called them signature cards or something like that. Basically, a sticker that could then either be slapped into the front of a book or mailed to somebody who was think I got the ebook, but I'd love to have it autographed. Well, here's a sticker with an autograph on it. So I'm going to be doing whatever I can to make sure that folks who want something like that can get it. So yes, those will be available. I don't know how or when quite yet, but that will, I'll let you know as soon as I know. Blubber Talk, thank you so much for the question. Coffee, tea, fancy water on me. I've more than appreciated your work for some time now as I've left my very dogmatic past. I hope it is productive and helpful. Excited for the book. Well, thank you so much. I'm excited for y'all to be able to read the book as well. Those who know my work well will not be surprised by much in the book. A lot of it will be quite familiar, but I think it will be helpful to have it all laid out in a very accessible way with references and everything like that. So I hope it functions as a reference work for folks who would like it to be that. Aloha Dan, aloha T.O. Do you have plans to expand on the appendix discussion in your Adonai's Divine Images? Yes, that's actually a plan for a future academic book. I don't know, I'm planning on doing it as an academic book, but I might also follow up with a trade volume associated with how Jesus is God. So yes, I do have plans to follow up on that. Still rooting for Esoterica's Justin Sledge on Data Over Dogma. Yeah, I've been on Esoterica for, I've been on there once, and I told Justin I'd love to have him on Data Over Dogma at some point, but our schedule is just so out of whack right now. we've got a bunch of people lined up to come on, so but I definitely will have to reach out to Justin. Oh no, I did it again. Sorry, I just realized that I didn't open up the Discord. And neglecting my peoples. All right. But let me get to this question first. Is it true Jesus used the same arguments as Pharisees? If so, why do Gospels make them hypocrites? What did Sadducees/Essenes stand for? So there are certainly hermeneutic frameworks that we find in the rabbinic literature that are probably adopted from the Pharisees that are taken up in the New Testament. And I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but there have been a number of publications that have talked about it. I think there are like 7 hermeneutic ideas that we see in rabbinic literature that we can also see being used in different ways in the New Testament. So it's not that Jesus uses the same arguments, but Jesus uses some of the same methodologies, some of the same hermeneutic methodologies as the Pharisees. And the Gospels make them hypocrites because the Gospels need an enemy, and they would prefer to have the Pharisees rather than Rome. And Vishanti tells me Zohar is part of the Kabbalah post-Talmud. Okay, thank you. And then what did Sadducees/Essenes stand for? Sadducees took a more narrow approach to Scripture and accepted primarily just the Pentateuch. And as a result, because the Pentateuch doesn't talk about resurrection or the afterlife or anything like that, they didn't seem to have an idea about an afterlife, and they were closely connected with the temple authority, which had become kind of puppets of Rome. The high priest was installed by that time by Rome, so they were connected with Roman power in some ways. So some people saw them as traitors, and others didn't. Essenes were frequently ascetics, a little more extreme. The folks who occupied the site we now know as Qumran, were probably Essenes, at least one group of Essenes. And Josephus talks a little bit about the four philosophies of Judaism. That's where we get most of our information about them. But thanks for the questions. Is the Shiloh prophecy in Genesis 49:10 applicable to Jesus? I mean, if you want to apply it to Jesus, you can. Is it about Jesus? No. If not, what is the correct interpretation of it? That's anyone's guess, because we're not sure exactly how to interpret Shiloh. A lot of scholars would say the text is not pristine. There is some corruption going on there, so we don't know exactly how to reconstruct it. But it just probably has to do with a future expected somebody coming, whether it's messianic or not. Hey, Dan, can you comment on the characterization of the Nephilim as these were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown, being immediately followed by everyone being wicked? So, yeah, what that probably has to do with Nephilim means fallen ones. And so I and some other scholars, I don't know that I would call it the consensus view. I don't know that there is a strong consensus regarding the identity of the Nephilim. But these were probably the dead, deceased souls of ancient warriors who were occupying the underworld and in different ways affecting humanity. And so they were, and everybody's being wicked primarily because of the sons of God and the daughters of humanity, not so much because of the Nephilim. I think that's just a reference to the Nephilim being on the earth at that time. But it's a little convoluted. It's not clear exactly what's going on there. But some good discussions about this and how that tradition developed. One, I think it's called The Origin of Evil Spirits by Archie Wright. Is that right? Yes, that's right. And let me just pull up the PDF. Come on. Okay. So Archie Wright, The Origin of Evil Spirits is one good discussion, but it's primarily about, as it says, the reception of Genesis 6:1-4 in early Jewish literature. Trying to think of the last name. Helga Kvanvig's book, Primeval History, Babylonian, Biblical, and Enochic, and Intertextual Reading, is another good book that has, I believe, a whole chapter on what's going on in Genesis 6. Let me make sure I'm right about that. The early Genesis 6:1-4, and the fate of the antediluvians. And I think they're probably going to, they're going to come back to that in the Enochic discussion. So that's another good book that's going to discuss Genesis 6. And I'm thinking there's another one. I don't know if this is a book or just a dissertation. Okay. Let me share another one. Where did it go? That should be it. Yes. Okay. The Sons of God in Genesis 6:1-4, analysis and history of exegesis. And I think that this is a 2019 book, I think based on a 2013 doctoral dissertation, if I remember correctly. Quackshot says, Dan, do you lean towards Goodacre's no Q theory or towards there being an actual Q source? I don't know enough to have very strong feelings, but I lean a little more towards Mark's theory, and I need to have him on the podcast too. I think he'd be wonderful. The Bible Guy, thank you so much for the question. Hey, Dan, why does Revelation call Jesus Alpha and Omega? This is the only Jesus divinity passage I have a hard time understanding. I think the book of Revelation is coming at a time pretty late in the first century where they're trying to overlap Jesus and God a lot more, and so you have Jesus identifying as, or you have God at the beginning talking about being first and last, and then at the end Jesus is Alpha and Omega. And so I think it's rhetorically identifying Jesus with God, but in a mysterious way, because they haven't really ironed out yet how they understand Jesus to be God. And that's one of the chapters in the Bible says so. I opened it up expecting to go to the table of contents, and then I remembered that this is just a mock-up. This is not the actual book. So that was not the table of contents, but I have the table of contents here. Just give me 1 second and I'll pull it up. All right, let's see if I can do this. Share screen. There we go. Oh, it's actually not in the first page of the table of contents, but here are the first 16 chapters of the book. And then let me go to the, and you probably can't even see that behind the question. And then let me go to the other page, which will have, there you go, chapter 17, the Bible says Jesus is God. So I talk in there about how they're understanding the relationship of Jesus to God, although I don't think I get into great detail about the book of Revelation. But yeah, that's definitely one of the places where they're kind of saying, yeah, there's a sense in which Jesus is also God, but we're not sure exactly how to make sense of it yet. All right, give me just 1 second to catch up. Didymus asked, what is the Hebrew word for whale? I think they just, I think, is tanin usually used for whale? I'm sure that modern Hebrew has a word that it also appears in the Hebrew Bible, but I'm going to say they probably just use tanin. Yeah, there aren't a bunch of places where I think it's, the KJV only renders whale twice, once in Job 7, once in Ezekiel 32, and both times tanin is the word. Let me see if the NRSV ever translates whale. And the NRSV UE never uses the word whale. Or let me just make sure that I didn't. Yeah, they don't use the word whale in the NRSV UE. So tanin, I guess, would be the closest we get, but arguably not referring to a whale. Ehenoma, or Ehenoma, apologize if I've pronounced that incorrectly. What's your opinion on soul sleep and the intermediate state? I don't have personal feelings to share about that. I don't think that there's anything in the biblical literature that reflects on that. That I think is something that comes from a much later time period. So I don't think if anybody's looking to appeal to the Bible to either support or attack that, I don't think the Bible's going to be helpful. But thank you for the question. Hand of Omega, who exactly are the other figures empowered by divine name before/after Jesus, and where can we learn about them? When does this stop and why? So you have Yahoel in the Apocalypse of Abraham as one who visits Abraham and claims to be able to do all these things that only God is supposed to do by virtue of the divine name which dwells in him. I think, there's an argument that the Son of Man in the Enochic literature, in the parables, is associated with the divine name. But there are more recent scholars who say that the Ethiopic probably isn't saying he was named, but probably says he was summoned. And so it's not clear that he's being endowed with the divine name. But I still think there are things going on with the divine name in the parables. And the name is still a a semi-autonomous vehicle for divine agency in the Book of Enoch. You have in, oh, I forget the text. There's a rabbinic text that comes from around the 5th century where who is the rabbi? There's a rabbi, and then there's a heretic. A certain heretic comes to them and talks about a passage where God says to somebody, "Come up to Adonai," and the heretic says, "Hey, why didn't why didn't God say, 'Come up to me'?" And the rabbi says, "Oh, that was Metatron. Metatron has God's name, or Metatron's name is very similar to God's name, and Metatron is referred to as the Adonai Katon, the little Adonai, in I believe Third Enoch. But then the heretic says, "Oh, well, if they have God's name, then we should worship them." And then the rabbi goes, "No." And so it's probably a cheeky little swipe at Christians, but the idea is that and it quotes Exodus 23:20. Um, I'm sending my angel before you to guard you on the way. Don't disobey him. Don't tick him off, because he does not have to forgive your sins because my name is in him. The idea being Metatron possesses the divine name and so can be referred to as Adonai or Adonai Katon, but that's a separate deity. And there are, I'm not remembering off the top of my head. There are one or two kind of more obscure examples, but I'll have to brush up on that. But thank you for a great question. Is it true that Genesis 49 is the oldest part of Genesis? I think I think the best that it has the best argument for being the oldest. At least parts of Genesis 49 have the best argument for being the oldest, because it's poetry and the narrative prose is much later. And yeah, it doesn't seem to fit as conveniently within the first millennium BCE concepts of the tribes of Israel and their relationship to each other. So I think for that reason, um, yeah, it's probably the best case for being the oldest. Any updates on an SBL fan meetup? I haven't had time to think about that, so I don't have any updates yet. But if folks are in San Diego, I would love to. Ravi Deet, I was like, Itai? No, Edit. Yes, it's Sanhedrin 38b. Thank you for the reminder. So pending. I would love to do something, but I don't have plans yet. Master Machetier, thank you so much for the question. I know that your scholarly take is separate than your religious beliefs. I don't think that you are biased in that manner. How your work has impacted your religious views, for me, scholarly work greatly impacted it. Yes, I think scholarly work frequently impacts people's religious beliefs. That's a boundary I have for my social media content. However, I don't talk about my own personal beliefs. But I do know an awful lot of scholars who deal with a lot of the same thing, and I know a lot of folks who continue to exercise their faith and who compartmentalize. That's what most of them talk about as kind of the method for keeping these things separate, where they try to think of their faith as something that operates on a different set of methods and requirements and standards and things like that from their academic work, but also and also their conclusions in their academic work changes so much that they've said they can't just be blown about by every wind of consensus, and so that's one of the ways that they compartmentalize that. And I promise you, I'm not saying that's what I do, but I have seen other people do that, and that's about as close as I'll get to talking about how I do it, is talking about friends and colleagues who have gone through similar things. So I'm sorry I can't give a comprehensive answer there, but I would just keep in mind that the scholarship is really just trying to arrive at the best account of the data that we can come up with, given the available data and the methods and the theories that we have today. So it's always, you can count on the scholarship changing in the future. So I wouldn't put too much faith in, or I wouldn't hang your faith on the scholarship too much. Shamgar Zosko says, curious if you've seen Inquisitive Bible Reader's video on the location of the Garden of Eden and wonder what your perspective is on Eden. Was it understood as a physical place on earth in the nebulous east, or do you more lean towards our Eden being a sort of political insertion into the story of Genesis 2, if I understand Peter Feynman's paper correctly? I don't think it was understood as a literal place on earth where they were like, oh yeah, if you look at how we describe it, you can go find the place, because like the Gihon River, like that's a spring right next to Jerusalem. And then other rivers aren't really identifiable with anything. And then you got the some rivers that are, but they're very far away from Jerusalem. So I think it's kind of a cosmic uh, cobbling together of things, rather than something where they were like, hey, you remember where we were last week? That one place that had the 4 rivers? Let's use that as our Garden of Eden. But I don't know the Inquisitive Bible Reader's video on the location of the Garden of Eden. I think it certainly was using Mesopotamia as a bit of a template. But again, I think it was more of a cosmic, mystical location. And Simone Bat Yochai mentions in relation to Sanhedrin 38b, the bit before it with Rabbi Akiva is very interesting as well, as it implies that Akiva may have been involved in 2 powers shenanigans and is attempting to absolve him of that. Yes, very interesting. And the 2 Powers in Heaven book and Peter Schaeffer's more recent book, 2 Gods in Heaven, are wonderful books to read. Happily Heterodox, thank you so much for the question. Why do you think Luke rejected Matthew's genealogy? I think probably because Matthew's genealogy is problematic. I think if you go through it with a fine-tooth comb, there are some issues with it. And I think I started to put together a video about it, and I don't think I got very far. But we talked about it on the Data Over Dogma podcast, didn't we? Hang on just a minute. Let me see if we did. I'll give you the episode that we talked about it. I don't see something about genealogy coming up. I could have sworn we talked about it. Sorry, I don't. I can't think of the details off the top of my head. But if you look at them, they're very different lengths, and I think Luke's is I think Luke's is the shorter one, and Matthew's is organized into segments of roughly equal length, which has kind of rhetorical purposes all its own that I think Luke is avoiding. But at the same, yeah, I don't know that I can talk my way into any more confidence than that right now. I would probably talk my way into trouble if I just try to make things up at this point. But thank you for the question. Hand of Omega, a historian said that Roman influence on Judea in fashion means that Jesus would have short hair, no beard, and a short tunic. Is she right? Possibly, but as far as I know, the consensus view is still that they would have had medium length hair, that Jesus probably would have had a beard. And I don't know about a short tunic. I mean, it depends on how much influence we're talking here. Because coming from Nazareth, they would have been not incredibly under an awful lot of influence from the Roman Empire. I have not seen scholars discuss that in a way that agrees with that conclusion. So I would say if that is an accurate theory, it is a theory that has not yet become the consensus, but maybe it will in the future. I don't know. David, thank you so much for the question. With the nonsense in OK trying to force the KJV in classrooms for its historical importance, wouldn't Walters need to include an edition with the Apocrypha if he were really sincere about that goal? Well, that would be the original KJV. The KJV that they had during the founding would have had the Apocrypha in it. And so if he thinks that the KJV is necessary for its historical significance, then why not get the KJV that was historical to that time period? And the reason is because the point is not to actually do the things he's claiming he wants to do. That's why his requirements for what the Bible should have are incredibly rare in a Bible publication and are only met by a few versions of the Bible, all of which have been directly endorsed by Donald Trump, one of which he's making money off of. So I think it was just an effort to sniff around for a little bit of favor from Donald Trump by saying, "Hey, I'll float you $3 million of state money for your Bibles." And yeah, I think it's pretty pathetic. Chief Dixon, thank you. Oh gosh, sorry, the way I have my windows arranged, I don't have the what is this thing called? Discord. I don't have the Discord visible all the time. Hang on just a moment. Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay, Chief Dixon, sorry about the delay. Dan, 2 Kings 17 talks about the 10 lost. Does Ezekiel 47:48 talk about those 10 tribes plus the 2 tribes of Judah being given back to Israel? Let me look up Ezekiel 47 and 48. I mean, that certainly sounds like the kind of thing they would prophesy in the exile. Give me just 1 second. So it says these are the boundaries by which you shall divide the land for inheritance among the 12 tribes of Israel. So that would be the 12 tribes. So I think the expectation is that they would be part of the restoration. These are the names of the tribes, yada yada yada, and they have the 10 tribes. Yeah. So I assume that it's been a while since I've been deep in Ezekiel, but I assume this is a prophecy about the restoration of all the houses of Israel. I mean, the idea that they would get back Israel as it was in the period of its greatest expansion under David is repeated a bunch of times, and so yeah, the 10 tribes would necessarily have to be a part of that. So I think most likely, but I would have to look at it a little closer to see exactly what the context is and what the rhetorical point is there. What do you think of Philemon being a forgery? That is not a self-serving question on my part at all, LOL. Why? Just because you have a publication coming out about precisely that question? I have not seen the full argument. And I'm open to it, but yeah, I've not seen the full argument. It would certainly buck the consensus, but I'm always happy to see an argument for something that goes against the consensus. And it's a book, right? I think you have a book coming out on that. We need to have you on the podcast to talk about that. Thaddeus, thank you so much for the question. Dan, did you watch Deadpool and Wolverine? Actually, I watched it last night. I told my wife and my 15-year-old daughter, y'all would love this movie. You just have to plug your ears every now and then, and they did love it. If so, what was your reaction to seeing Wolverine in his appropriate brown colors? Annoyed that it was just a flash and it was done. But the cameos and the montage, yeah, were great. That was a lot of fun, and they recreated the McFarlane Hulk reflection in the claws scene. That was great. Yeah, it was just a fun ride all around. I know a lot of people are annoyed at it, but yeah, if you let it be what it's supposed to be and just enjoy the ride, I think you have a great time. Bobby, thank you so much for the question. Please make a rebuttal to IP's Exodus video on you. So I'm not going to be, well, I guess I will have to be responding to IP. So I don't deal with IP anymore. However, they brought in another guy named Joel to do this response video, and they were responding to me. And so I'm actually going to be joining Kip Davis and Heath Durrell, author of the 2017 book, Child Sacrifice in Ancient Israel, and we're going to be responding to their video together. So I think we're recording it next Tuesday. I don't know when it's going to go out, but yes, indirectly I will be responding. Yeah, and it's silly. Shamgar's Oscode says, in one of your recent videos about Daniel and the three musketeers is stricken through and Hebrews is replaced, you mentioned that the Hebrew names likely were ad hoc, while Daniel's Babylonian name was also an ad hoc meaning. I speculated that maybe that's why, that they had two different sources. One's using one version, another's using completely different names, and when they brought them together, they were like, oh, we'll just identify them. And would part of this be due to Daniel being a Canaanite hero of sorts? Daniel, man of Rapua, as cited by Ezekiel. Could be. I had a discussion in the comments with someone who suggested that the memory of Daniel likely faded by the time Daniel was written because of the fall of the Phoenicians. So there are an awful lot of folks who would argue that, and when we watched the movie last night, Vishanti, I had to pause it and say, hey, I had a friend that when we were in, it was in Atlanta, right? Yeah. I'm not making that up, right? It was in it wasn't in San Diego when we were in Atlanta who created that cosplay outfit, because they didn't know who that was. Sorry. There are an awful lot of people who would suggest that a lot of the mythological traditions that we see from Ugarit and elsewhere actually lasted an awful lot longer and were preserved underground for a lot longer. I think Peter Heyman made that argument in his 1991 paper on monotheism as a misused term in Jewish studies, pointing out that there are traditions that we know from early Canaanite literature that pop up in rabbinic literature. We're like, where did they get that from? And so it was probably lurking for a lot longer than a lot of people assume. So that's a possibility. In fact, I would say that's plausible. And Chrissy's book is out already. I saw it mentioned somewhere. I've been running around trying to get so many things done. I've got a deadline on the 4th for an article that I really have to push through to get finished by then. So I'm sorry I did not know, Chrissy, that your book was already out. But yes, we'll have to get in touch about getting you on the podcast. Hand of Omega, thank you for another question. Is the idea of resurrection inspired by Ezekiel's Valley of Bones vision? How did it become the resurrection of Jesus? So I don't think that it was the only inspiration. I certainly think that it was a contributor to it. But I think resurrection, is probably something that develops in the Greco-Roman period. I think the Enochic literature is contributing to it. Things like Second Maccabees are contributing to it. But it's something that develops pretty late. And I think Ezekiel is one of the streams of tradition that influences it, but I don't think it is the inspiration for it. EJ, thank you so much for the question. Hey, Dr. Dan, love your work. Thank you so much for the kind words. Growing up independent Baptist, you successfully debunked everything I was taught to believe as a child. Glad I could help. I've pre-ordered your book for my mom and hope she'll begin to think critically. Well, thank you so much, and I hope it will accomplish what you would like it to. I wrote it for folks who are already kind of like-minded, but I figured that it would be something that a lot of folks who are not like-minded would be getting as gifts. So hopefully it doesn't rub your mom the wrong way. Not that I wrote it to rub anybody the wrong way, but hopefully it is received in the spirit in which it was written and in the spirit in which you give it to her. So yeah, keep me posted on that. I would like to know how that works out for folks, and if there's anything I can do to help make sure that it lands correctly. I'm happy to do whatever I can. Hand of Omega, thank you so much. When the Bible speaks of the kingdom of God coming, is that the same thing as modern going to heaven? If not, how did one become the other? I think in most of the New Testament, the kingdom of God idea is that this would be God's kingdom on earth. And then probably with more apocalyptical thinking. It shifted, and particularly as the Platonic influence contributed to a notion that we were going to leave this kind of base fleshly existence and have a more pure heavenly existence, spiritual existence. But the actual transition from one to the other, that's an interesting question. I don't think I have seen much published on. So yeah, that's certainly something to that if scholars have not looked into it, I would be surprised if nobody's looked into it. I have not seen anyone's looking into it, but if no one has looked into it, they ought to. Nathaniel, thank you so much for the question. Is the faith reliable if Hebrews is anonymous? Well, Hebrews is anonymous one way or another. So whether or not the faith is reliable, I think that is a theological question, not one that that the data can answer. But yeah, I mean, Hebrews is explicitly anonymous, and I think there was a survey that was given at a British New Testament Society conference. They had like 108, 109 respondents, and it was all about is Paul the author of this text? And excuse me, you had your disputed Paulines, and then you had your spurious Paulines, where the majority said either no or I don't know. And then you had Hebrews, where I think one scholar said Paul was the author, and every other scholar said no, Paul was not the author. If even one person said it, it might have been nobody. So yeah, it's definitely an anonymous text, but whether or not the faith is reliable, that's a theological question. Like the letter itself is probably not incredibly historical. It's probably representing a minority view and did not become a widespread view until it was, for whatever reason, accepted as one of the scriptures and included in the canon. In Life Sin, thank you so much for the question. I would love it if you could do a response to one of the videos that John Truth has put out. I think I have one in the queue that I'm going to be responding to. Please take your pick. I'm sure you have fun analyzing them. Thank you for all of your work. Well, thank you so much for the question. Yeah, I've responded to John Truth a handful of times. Yeah, there's some silly things. I think there's a video that was done recently where he was like, yeah, I replaced my entire wardrobe with linen clothes, and then goes through the fake research about frequencies and stuff like that. So I may respond to that one. But thank you for the question. Klaas, thank you so much. What do you mean with compartmentalize your faith from scientific opinion? Not to sound rude, but do you shut off part of your brain? Well, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about what other colleagues say, and they talk about compartmentalization because there are certain methodological, theoretical standards and models and things that you use for scientific research. Certain things are not admissible. In matters of faith, they don't impose those restrictions on what kind of knowledge or experience or whatever is admissible. So I think that's when they talk about compartmentalization, it's about saying this kind of thing would not be admissible. This wouldn't get through peer review if I wanted to get this published in a scientific or academic journal. But I can use this experience, this logic, this whatever to inform my own personal faith. Again, speaking as if speaking in the third person, as if in the first person. So that's how I've heard them talk about it. But yeah, no, not saying turn off part of your brain, but turn off part of your now I'm forgetting. Now I'm blanking on words. But part of your criticism, the standards, the evidentiary standards that you're imposing. Silent Mandible, thank you so much for the question. Have you ever read Ernst Bloch on Christianity? I don't believe I have. It's not ringing a bell. Sorry. David, thank you so much for another question. Matthew's genealogy divides into 3 sections of 14 generations. I think we're referencing David with the numerical value of Dalet. Yes, it's definitely 3 of 14-ish generations. with your main tent poles there for the genealogy. Thank you for the reminder. Coy, thank you so much. Hello, Dan. Hello, Coy. I'm looking at your question, but I'm thinking of looking at you. Thank you so much for stepping out into the world and taking the time to communicate with us. I appreciate the very kind words. About the Johannine community, do you think they existed? Any recommendations for resources there? I think there probably would have been people who identified themselves that way. I don't know if a full-fledged community existed. There are going to be people who have stronger feelings than me about that. I think there is something coming out or has come out recently on Johannine community. One, I would say Robin Faith Walsh's book, The Origins of Early Christian Literature, talks about the idea that these texts were the product of communities and critiques that. That's it. It was a paper that just came out. In fact, it is open access. Okay, so Did the Johannine Community Exist by Hugo Mendez was just published published in 2020. So here, I just popped a link in the, did I put that in the starred thing or did I put that in the live? I just posted a link somewhere. Yeah, it's in the live. So I would certainly not pretend to argue with Hugo about that. So I think that's probably some of our best thinking on the question. But thank you. I would recommend Hugo, and I think Hugo's probably got a healthy bibliography there. Yeah, plenty of stuff there. So yeah, I would go to there. David Ross. Oh gosh, my Discord keeps falling behind. Okay, let me see if I've missed anything. Chrissy says, the person who got me into biblical studies, UMC minister and PhD Bible scholar Anthony Tomasino, used to tell me I have two caps. When I'm in the church, I have my pastor's cap. When I do scholarship, I hang that cap on the door and put on my scholar's cap. It's about making sure we do our scholarship honestly, not be religious, not religious, but that means I come to conclusions that I might not like religiously. That's where the pastor's cap makes sense of things later when I'm done doing scholarship. Yeah, that sounds like the kind of explanation I've heard from colleagues. Sorry, David. Thank you so much for the question. Did ancient Hebrews see a symbolic connection between Adam naming the woman Chava, the Chai in Kol Im Kol Chai, and the Chaim and Hachaim or Eitz Hachaim? Thank you. I'm sure the connection was not lost on them, but there's probably more of a connection to, I think, probably more of a connection to an ancient goddess concept associated with the concept of life. But the etymology is pretty straightforward there. So it is etymologically related to those other words. So I think the connection would be lost on them. Hand of Omega, thank you so much. There's no etiology for disease in the Bible. Do we know where they thought it came from mythically? So in like Mesopotamia and in Egypt, there were ideas about about entities that penetrate orifices, ears and noses, and women during menstrual cycles and stuff like that. So that certainly would have been one way. They would have had ideas about diseases probably linking with their contamination framework. Like everybody kind of intuitively has an idea about contamination. We have this intuitive disgust sensitivity that includes smells, tastes, certain sensations. And there's a sexual disgust sensitivity that is intuitive as well, that I talk about a bit in my forthcoming book in the chapter on homosexuality. So intuitively, we feel the ick about certain things, and so it beyond a doubt that would have been the interpretive lenses with which they would have viewed certain pathologies and diseases and things like that, but they would have had other ways to account for it as well. And you get the idea by the Greco-Roman period of sin contributing to disease and things like that. Regarding the Adam and Eve question, I like Hamori's label for them, Life Girl and Dirt Boy. If you have not read Esther Hamori's book, God's Monsters, it's wonderful. So yeah, I'm sure we had different opinions from all across the different authors of the Bible about that. Beekman of Beekman's World, thank you for the question. Hi, Dr. Dan. Hi, Beekman. Thanks for your advice on Islam. It led me to a significant historical critical effort in Germany, or Deutschland, if you're nasty. Corpus Coranicum. Oh, yeah, Coranicum. Also, the Quran and late antiquity, a shared heritage, Angelica Newworth. Well, I'm glad that could lead you to some other resources. Thank you for following up and letting me know. Excuse me. Corpus Coranicum. Why do I? That sounds very familiar. The spelling just threw me off. Hang on just a second. Digital research. Okay, Berlin Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities. All right, very cool. I'll have to look more into that. Thank you for the follow-up. JP, thank you so much for the question. If you could have one person from antiquity, but not in the Bible itself on the podcast, who would you want to get? Interesting question. I would want to get Aristotle on the podcast. Yeah, I think the influence of Aristotle on medieval and later Christianity is just is so profound. And I would also want to hear about what Aristotle thought about Plato. I think that would be cool. Way above my head, but I think it would be very cool. Because I tried to translate some Aristotle one time, and then I stopped, and my life is better because of that, because I stopped. Han of Omega, thank you for another question. Is Nimrod really Gilgamesh? Does his being described as a hunter imply kingship? I mean, there's kind of a fuzzy association there. Gilgamesh, I think it's plausible. I don't know that we could say for certain that that's who's being referenced, but I'm sure somebody knows more about the scholarly discourse on that than I do. I don't think I've seen a strong argument made that Nimrod has to be Gilgamesh, though. Chrissy says, do you think the Bible scholars' language learning limitations to English, German, French, Spanish, and Italian has led to a potentially limited and myopic and Western-centric scholarly community? Absolutely. And what was it? It was like an episode of House where House was like, I'm learning Sanskrit. Like, why? It's because this influential paper just got published in a Sanskrit journal, and I was like, I aspire to be that level of committed and pedantic. As someone studying, and you say Soviet literature right now, that brings up the fact that people who are scholars who grow up in Slavic contexts and who are experts in Slavic languages have immediately like an advantage when it comes to Enochic, Old Church Slavonic, that kind of stuff. They got a big advantage there. It was really interesting to me how much they knew our work, but we knew basically nothing about theirs, and how ahead, in my opinion, they were on a lot, and also just how divorced we often are from scholarship on the Bible, like in Japan, China, Russia, Slavic countries. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and that's one of the issues with our ability to communicate more, the democratization of access to scholarship to a lot more folks, is that there's so much that you would have to become familiar with, and sometimes those other folks are a lot better at becoming familiar with a broader range of our work, and we ignore their work. So yes, I think that's absolutely a valid criticism, and I'm certainly guilty of that. I try to read what I can in German, French, and Spanish and Italian, but yeah, it's certainly not enough. Chris, weird question. Bring it. Are you a descendant, or all right, let's see it as I'm supposed to say. Are you a descendant of the Civil War General George B. McClellan? No. I'm actually not by blood a McClellan. My dad was born to a Wagner, and then his parents got divorced when he was like 3, and then his mom remarried a McClellan, whose family came from Scotland only a few generations back. So, no, not descended. I think I hear my garage door, which means my wife and kids are back from their outing, and I need to go prepare dinner because I've got a Hebrew class to teach in just over an hour. So let me try to get through. It's the lightning round, so I apologize for everyone who has posted questions that I might not get to, but I'm going to try. Sebastian, thank you so much. In Genesis 10, different groups have their own languages. Then in Genesis 11, the whole world has one language. Is that evidence of differing traditions being woven together? I think it is probably just kind of backtracking a little bit, but I think it is, yeah, there's this tradition that is out there just kind of stray, and then it gets tacked on to the end. And so it's not strictly linear. You're kind of hopping back and forth a little bit. And I talk a little bit about that in the podcast episode that we did on that. I think that was released this last Monday. But thank you for the question. Body says, thank you for all your work. Thank you so much. I appreciate that very much. Thaddeus, thank you. What do you think of Mandaeus, who say John the Baptist is the final prophet? That's a theological question. I don't think anybody qualifies as the final prophet until you have theological stakes, blood in the game. But if you want to learn more about Mandaeus, I would highly recommend checking out James McGrath's work, including, do I have it here? I guess I don't have it here. He has 2 books on John the Baptist. One is called Christ Maker, and that's the more popular level biography of John the Baptist. And the other is called John of History, Baptist of Faith. And that's the more academic treatment of John the Baptist. And Mandaeism plays a big role in that discussion. Thaddeus, thank you so much. What do you think of Mandaeus who say that John? Okay. We just asked that question. And when does your new book come out? My new book comes out on April 29th, 2025. And pre-orders are available now. And you can go into the link in my bio, my link tree at the top. There's a landing page with information about where you can get a hard copy or an EPUB or an audiobook, and I will be recording or narrating, as they say in the industry, the audiobooks starting probably in February. Volder, thank you so much for the contribution. I don't know the formal name for that, if that's a sticker or something else, but thank you. Nathaniel, when did Jews/Christians fully abandon henotheism? That's a difficult question because there's an awful lot of conceptual overlap between what people label henotheism and what other people would label monotheism. I don't think there was a threshold where you can say we have henotheism on this side and we don't have henotheism on the other side. I think a lot of that could be described as henotheism today. So I think from a strictly data point of view, I would say I don't think that they fully abandon henotheism. But there will be people who disagree with that. Hope to catch you before you leave. Someone in the chat had a cool thought I figured I'd share. Any chance of having top-level Assyrian wizard Irving Finkel on the podcast? He's done YouTube stuff before. That would be interesting. I don't know that he would be interested, but I'll have to think about that one and talk with Dan about that. Dan, what do you think of Dennis MacDonald's idea of Homeric influence on the Gospels? I think there's certainly some kind of influence. I don't know that it is an incredibly... I don't think it's something that bubbles to the surface very much. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if there's influence. Emmanuel, thank you so much. Hi, Dan. I enjoy your videos. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Is there anything sort of etymological relation between the morning star in Revelation 2:28 and Isaiah 14:12? No. Isaiah 14:12 isn't about Satan. The idea is just, ooh, you're this guy that is associated with Venus. And then Revelation 2:28 is also kind of association with Venus. And we also have in either, I think it's, it's either First or Second Peter. There's a reference to when the morning star rises in your hearts, and that's actually translated Lucifer in the Vulgate, but it's probably a reference to Jesus. So yeah, etymologically, no. Isaiah is also Hebrew, Revelation is Greek. So I don't think there's a relationship there. But thank you for the question. Dave, to what degree were the writers of the Old Testament exposed to Greek philosophers? Well, I think once you get to Greco-Roman period Judaism, there is more exposure within Greco-Roman period Jewish literature. I don't think much, if any, of that is found in the Bible. But in the Persian period literature, in Greco-Roman period literature, there's probably some exposure to it, but none of them were philosophers. None of them were formally trained in it. So I don't think you see a ton of that bubbling to the surface. The professor, thank you so much for the comment. Hey, Dan, hope all is well. Busy, but well, thank you. Wondering if you've been watching Agatha all along, and if so, could you explain the significance of, spoiler, the passage William reads at his bar mitzvah? I watched the first episode, and unfortunately, I have not had an opportunity to catch up with anything else. So no, I have not. I cannot explain the significance of the passage that William reads. I'm sorry, but it's probably something pretty straightforward. Yeah, I don't know all of the service off the top of my head, but I don't know that there's anything beyond just kind of a surface level significance. Valder, thank you so much. What's your response to people who think the Hyksos seem to fit some aspect of Exodus, that they're really reaching, that they don't know the history of ancient Egypt very well? There's not really a connection to make there. Mr. Wee, thank you so much. Is there a Dan McClellan out there you recommend for critical scholarship on the Quran and Islamic history? I get that question. I have had that question a number of times. Unfortunately, I don't know anyone like that who is out there doing public scholarship and is approaching things from the lens of critical scholarship. I wish I did know of someone, but I don't. And I'm sure there will be someone out there doing that at some point, and I will let everybody know if and when I find out about it. But I don't know anything off the top of my head. Okay, and now things are being thrown at my office. So they never abandoned henotheism. They're still henotheist angels or deities in all ways but name. I can't argue with that. Okay, thank you everybody for your time and your attention and for your support. I appreciate it very much. I hope if you asked a question that I was able to get to, that it was a satisfactory answer. I apologize if I wasn't able to do much more than pay lip service to it, though. I've got to go. I will be back again soon. Hope you have people around you you love. Hope you have a warm, safe place to spend the night. Hope you have enough food on the table. And I appreciate your support. It allows me to do this for a living, and that means the world to me. So thank you very much, and I will see you all around. Bye, everybody.